You ready? Okay, this is our seventh session, I believe, and we are going to begin by talking about helping others recover from their losses in life. I believe this is on about page 13, and just talking about the fact that there are various losses, different types of losses that people come in contact with, and trauma and crisis receive the attention. But the heart of trauma and crisis, it really is the loss. In order to understand and appreciate fully the significance of crisis and trauma, we need to understand the multitude and complexity of loss. You can ask just about anybody that you work with or that you hang around with, what is the loss in your life that you have never grieved over? And you'd be surprised. People pretty much have something, that at least one thing, if not multiple things, that they are keenly aware of. Loss is part of the human condition. It's a part of life. It's inevitable. Major loss doesn't mean that many of us are well prepared to handle this type of stress. Significant losses in life are likely to engender overwhelming negative emotions, disruption in everyday life, and long-term problems. With loss, it's inevitable. There's going to be change. There's going to be opportunities to grow, new insight, and new understanding. And it'll make you a better person if you allow it to. All the positive descriptions and words of hope that we can throw in there are beneficial, but it also takes time for those things to bring about results in the end too. Losses like this that we're talking about do produce grief. Loss doesn't mean that we're losers. It just simply means we encountered a trauma. We encountered something that brought about and resulted in crisis, and it means we want to be winners. We want to have success, and in time we will be if we allow ourselves to have proper healing and let it take place. Loss requires identification. When the person that you're counseling walks through the door, the first thing you want to find out and ask yourself is, I wonder what losses this person has experienced. And if you'll do this, it'll help you identify with them and relate to them. It'll help you to be empathetic and sympathetic with them in a better way. You don't want to just shrug it off. You don't want to just kind of half-heartedly approach people because they're looking for help and they're looking for ministry when they come in. One significant loss can create a crisis, or depending upon the circumstances, a trauma or a series of losses can generate a crisis in a family. And people need intervention. They need help when they come into a situation like this. It sometimes helps to create a timeline. We did talk about this a little bit briefly last night. But basically a timeline is just drawing a straight line. And along that straight line, you just mark a time periods. Go back as far as you can remember and mark time periods of particular moments where you had trauma in your life or a crisis that you can recall. And then you go throughout life all the way up to the present. Then look back over it and evaluate it, and just ask yourself, did I properly grieve over that? How does that still affect my life? What are my emotions when I recall that, when I think about it? And you'll be able to determine yourself pretty well how you still feel about it, and if it's still an issue in your life. And sometimes people need to grieve properly over those circumstances in their lives. They just simply never did. They never received healing. And if you leave things undone, you can create complicated mourning or complicated grief by not addressing and processing those issues correctly. So change involves some form of loss of the way things were at one time. And everybody experiences as many as 20 major losses during their lifetime, and actually hundreds of small losses. Small changes go unnoticed. Sadly, even young people experience these things. I was discussing with someone last night about teenagers. So one of the most frustrating things about our American culture is this thing we call dating. What it does is it just ruins young people for marriage. because it repeatedly breaks their heart, you know. They just barely get into puberty and they start dating in America. And then what happens? They get their heart broken. They get their heart broken. And then by the time they finally get married, you know, 19 to 25, 30 years old, whenever they get married, their heart's been broken, you know, 15 times. And they've got all kinds of emotional scars and all kinds of relational issues and problems. And now they're finally going into marriage with all these scars and issues and hang-ups and wounds, and they're the worst candidate for marriage. And the healthy thing, which it's never going to fly in America, but the healthy thing would be to just lock them all up until their marriage age. You know what I'm saying? And and then bring them out like they do in the Indian culture. I'm talking about India Indians, or you know, some of the African cultures, and just have arranged marriages. Like I said, I know this won't work in America, but bring them out and say, let me introduce you to your future spouse. And that's why their marriages last so well in these cultures, because they're just thrilled to finally have a relationship. I mean, they really are. You ought to go overseas and visit, and you ought to talk to some of these people in these cultures. I've seen the most handsome people marry the most ugly people, and they didn't care. I'm talking about just being carnal about it. You know, you'd think in some of these cultures, why did they pair these two together? I mean, they don't even seem. It has nothing to do with appearance. It has nothing to do with anything except for basically they stay within their class, because their cultures are, you know, by caste and class and things. And they'll put them together, and they're the happiest people. They just get along great. They have wonderful children and families, and their two families get along great, because everything is within certain culture and caste. And everything, you know, everybody pretty much thinks the same and relates the same. And so they're paired on levels that make a whole world of difference, instead of what we in our culture do. Our culture is all about, you know, is he cute, and you know what I mean. Is she attractive, and you know, personalities and all this kind of stuff that last about that long once you get married. How many of you know what I'm talking about? And so we have this disaster in America that it doesn't work too good. And it's because of the very stuff we're talking about. Instead of marriage becoming this wonderful experience that you build your life on like it's supposed to be, like it was in the Bible, in the Eastern culture, you know, that Jesus and the Scriptures are revolve around when the Bible's being taught, and everything that we learn and read about, it's not that way in our culture. So what happens now? Now in our culture, marriage is this horrible experience. You know, it's this terrible test and trial for people. And you know why? Because we make it that way. Because we allow and we encourage our children to have these relationships. We call it dating. And there you have it. That's my soapbox. So, but you know what? It's true. It really is true. We all did it ourselves. In other words, I'm not sitting up here, you know, preaching to the choir, so to speak. I'm part of the choir or whatever. But, you know, it's not a good plan. It doesn't work. The most common bereavement in our country, obviously, is adults losing parents. And it's not, because it is common, it's accepted in our country. I mean, there's nothing we can do to avoid it. And so we as a nation just kind of look at it kind of haphazardly as, well, you know, it happened and they lost their parent. And we just kind of want to just go on about life and get over it. A lot of companies will give you 3 days or what have you, or some companies won't give you anything. They just expect you to run, bury them, and get back and go about life as if nothing happened. And so we sort of grieve secretly. But the fact is that most adults for the rest of their life will grieve to some degree over the loss of parents. Now, normal, healthy grief process, again, has a limit to it. It has 12 to 18 months for the healthy process to continue and everything. But still, there are going to be elements of grief that continue for the rest of life when you lose a parent, someone you love. And probably mostly because it's not addressed and it's not ministered to like it should be, particularly if it's a difficult loss. when it takes place. Some difficult types of loss would be unspeakable losses. This is, and there's a lot of them. These losses can occur, and most of the time they're not even talked about. Pregnancy loss is probably one of the major ones, biggest ones, that we're aware that every year almost 900,000 of the 6.5 million pregnancies in the United States end in some form of miscarriage or stillbirth, and another 1.5 million end in abortion. In the space of a year, almost 2.5 million people are affected by pregnancy losses of one kind or another. Miscarriage, abortion, and the inability to have a child are losses that are both devastating as well as shrouded by silence. It's like people don't talk about it. They just don't say much. But the fact is, there's nothing that's more painful and more heart-wrenching than to lose a child. I mean, really, that's almost the most traumatic thing that can happen to a couple, to grandparents, is to lose a child. You just, you know, until you've been there, you can sort of imagine it, but you really don't know it until you experience it. And of course, God's grace is sufficient, but that still doesn't mean it's not hard. When you hit the job market, losses multiply and rejections occur. And someone gets a raise and somebody, you know, gets a promotion. And then somebody gets fired and somebody gets a deal and somebody loses a deal. Somebody gets an award for doing good and somebody don't. Businesses fail, businesses succeed. The economy dropped in 2008 and now it's on the increase again. At least that's what they tell us. And you get a good job, and then sometimes you get in a job where you feel like it's not going anywhere. There can be physical losses. You can be sick, or you can be healthy. In other words, you never know what really is going to happen in life. You can suddenly start gaining a lot of weight, or you can start losing a lot of weight. And the funny thing is, in our culture, it all depends on what culture says is good. You know, right now I'm looking at the internet, and it seems like they're really liking won't say overweight, but larger models. Did you notice that lately? But I remember when I was a child, and even years beyond that, the bonier the woman was, the more they liked those models. Twiggy, yeah. So even her name implies it, right? So it's really kind of crazy. But you know, people respond to that. And they feel grief and they feel traumatized if they don't fit the mold and if they don't fit in. Muscle tone, skin, shape, hair, vision, hearing, sexuality. The big deal right now, our society is determined they're going to make us accept transvestites and the homosexual lifestyle and all of these things. So now, you know, the homosexual, the gay community is traumatized because the heterosexual won't accept them. Well, I want to tell you something. I am traumatized because they would actually expect such a thing of society and of me. And that they, excuse me, I'm sorry. Anyway, how many of you know there's two, I guess I shouldn't have said that. There's two sides to every coin. But I'm simply saying a lot of times sin traumatizes people. And, you know, you can say, well, everybody's got a right to their own opinion. And I agree with that. We do live in a country that says, well, at least it used to be you had freedom of speech. I'm not sure where that's headed now. Yeah, that's basically true. Yeah. And so... trauma is an issue anyway. I'll just leave it at that. Frequent losses are also a different type of, you know, can be a different type. And when you consider frequent losses, we don't usually lose many of our friends to death early in life. Yet in later years, this starts to happen more. I can remember... my mother saying here not too long ago, she said, you know, most of my friends are beginning to, you know, pass away and stuff. But she's really not that old yet. But she's beginning to notice that people are beginning to go to be with the Lord around her. And then probably this, again, we said earlier, the single most common thing is the loss of parents, of adults. Gradual losses is another one. the loss of children when they move out and establish their own families can be complicated. Funny thing with my wife is she seemed to do fine with the first three moving out. But for some reason, with our last son going off to college, she's really struggled with this. Does some of you ladies have this problem? Is that what it is? It's really strange to me. Yeah, I guess so. But okay, is that what you did? Okay. Okay. Do you know what? I'm not joking. She actually suggested that one time about us moving to Longview. And I said, no, I don't think so. I said, I don't think he would appreciate that. But anyway, yeah, it's funny how grief affects you. But she has grieved. My wife has grieved now for a year and a half over our fourth son going to college, and now she's saying, and he's never coming home. I say, he'll be home for Christmas. And she just doesn't appreciate that. But yeah. So accumulated losses is another type of losses. We seem to handle losses better when they're not so frequent, when they don't happen, one after another and seem to build up and accumulate. But when they do, it becomes complicated. It seems to weight our coping skills. We become overtaxed, and it becomes quite a task for us. The final losses. The other difficulty with losses is their finality. If you lose a job when you're 27, you don't even hardly think about it. You just go get another job. But if you're 57, it's a whole different ballgame. It's a whole different world. You don't just go get another job. It's because it's not the same. It's a difficult task and it's a difficult effort. If you have a divorce or your partner dies when you're young, it's not fun. It's traumatic, and you're gonna need some healing and some time to recover. And I would encourage anybody that's been through a divorce, don't just remarry immediately, but allow some time, amen, for yourself to recover and heal. But at least when you're younger, the odds are you're going to be able to find someone, and you're going to be able to pick up life and go on easier. When you're older, it's more difficult. Not saying that you can't find someone, not saying that you won't remarry or something of that nature, just simply saying anyone that's been in that position knows that it's not the same game. It's different. And so there can be some complications there. Diagnosis, doctor giving you a report that you don't want to hear. Maybe you're disabled or you got a disease or something like that. And the difficult thing in our society is a lot of times we lose our identity to the disease. Instead of being Lee anymore, suddenly I become the disease. Well, that's the guy with cancer. And this the guy that's the guy in church in the wheelchair. It's like we sort of lose our identity of who we are, and we become that person. And it just adds and complicates the whole situation. And at other times in our lives, we lose our identity to certain losses and situations that develop in our lives. Then there are threatened losses. Threatened losses are hard to deal with in life. These are the things that could possibly happen. Things that could happen, and there's not much you can do about it. You sense that you're out of control. You sense that there's this foreboding, this inevitable thing that can happen. Example that right here I have is you've been working for a company for 20 years or 19 years, and you're planning to retire at 20 years, and you're going to get benefits and insurance and certain things, and you're excited about it and you're anticipating it, and right at the end of that. And this has happened a lot in the last probably 10 or 15 years to people. They come to you at the end of your 19th year, right before you're going to retire, with your retirement benefits, and they tell you that they don't need you anymore, and since you're not going to finish your 20 years, you're not going to get your benefits either. That's a terrible thing to happen, but it's happening now, with companies downsizing and corporations not caring about their employees as much as they care about the bottom dollar. It's a terrible situation. So there are many other life-threatening losses in life, and some of those could be awaiting the outcome of biopsy from the medical clinic. A spouse is saying, I think I'm divorcing you. A business investment is a possibility of not coming through. Being sued by an angry employee or a customer. Being in a foreign country and the government threatens to retain everyone as hostages. That'd be fun. A friend telling you that they suspect your son has been using drugs. Just any of these kind of things can really send your life spiraling and put you into a panic mode. And it's called trauma. And you don't know what to do. And suddenly you're disoriented and you really don't know how to handle this situation. And these are just potential losses, and they could happen. And the odd thing is they happen to people that don't suspect them. That's why they cause trauma in our lives. And we have to be prepared to deal with them, but we also need to realize that there are other people that they happen to, and God's called us to help people who have encountered these kind of things. There are 8 major types of loss that can impact any of those we counsel as well as ourselves. There's material loss, which can be anything that's important to us. A physical object, something that's familiar to us. It could be losing a house, or maybe not losing it, but just simply having to move. I remember as a young child, when I was about 15, my dad finally took a job with a company that wanted to move us to Indiana. And my mom had a hard time with that. She had a hard time giving up her home, and she had a hard time leaving her home, as far as the town that she grew up in and had lived in all of her life, to move to what she called at that time Yankee country, which really, that was silly. But, in her mind, she's just a little southern girl. And to her, that was a foreign country. And it's funny, but that's kind of how they looked at us, I remember going to school, and I hadn't been there a week, and I had one of the kids in class say, I thought everybody down there wore overalls and straw hats and went barefoot. I was raised in Montgomery, Alabama. And so, and you know what? The kid was serious. He was serious. Of course, he was right, too, but that was a joke. Y'all thought we did, too, didn't you? No, we wore shorts and no shirt and went barefooted. Okay. Abstract loss. These are losses that may not be apparent, but they're an important part of our lives. It basically could be just anything. Relational loss, the relationship is the ending of opportunities to relate to another person. It could be the breakup in a friendship. It could be, I'll tell you, some traumatic things have happened in churches and organizations, clubs and things of that nature, where there's been division and strife, and basically relationships broken, and people's hearts are broken because they've lost lifelong friendships over something that took place. It can involve talking with people, sharing experiences, touching, negotiating, conflicting, and being in the emotional and physical presence of another human being. And it's very, very painful, because you're used to having coffee with them every morning or once a week. You're used to going to church with them, or you're used to spending time with them, and all that's changed. Intrapsychic loss. This is loss. This loss is in the way of counselees viewing themselves when they undergo a change. They lose an emotionally important image of themselves, as well as the possibilities of what might have been. It could involve changing personal plans or giving up a long-time dream, or there could be an expectation loss when someone loses courage, faith, or hope. It fits into this category. It could be a young couple who have not been married very long, and they have dreams of, having children and a home and building a life together, and one of them, passes away at an early age. Now, this is the type of loss this would be. It's more than just the loss of losing the person. It's the loss of what to them feels like or appears to them to be the loss of their future, of their life and their plans. The functional loss, this is when we're all aware of the functional losses such as muscular, neurological functions, the use of their body, in other words, or maybe the use of their the loss of their mind. Some patients with dementia, they'll come in and go out, and when they come in, they realize that I've been out. They realize that I don't know where I've been. I don't know what's been going on, and I don't know who's been here and who I've missed, and it's very heartbreaking to them as well as to the family, but it's difficult. And so there's a lot of grief there, and there's a lot of grief of knowing that in any moment I could suddenly go back into that state. So there's a lot of pain and memory there. Role loss, this affects us all at times, and it can be a social thing, it can be a position, it can be any type of important role that one plays in life, and when they feel like they've lost this, when there's that change that takes place, it affects them. Systemic loss. There's also a type of loss where it's different than a role loss in that it usually occurs when a person leaves a group. What it does, it upsets the balance of the group. It throws everything off. Let's say that you're working in a business and there's a key person on the team, and that person passes away, or that person leaves abruptly, and it just throws everything into a spin. And it's traumatic to the whole system in there. Well, it is traumatic. It's traumatic to everyone involved. And yes, there's a grief involved, and there's all kinds of symptoms and crisis mode that takes place. Then you have an ambiguous loss, and this is a difficult and unrecognized type of a loss. And there's two basic kinds of this. There's the physically present and the physically absent ambiguous type of loss. And and this is because it's unclear whether they're dead or alive. Missing soldiers and kidnapped children illustrate this type of loss. In its worst form, many who lost loved ones in the 9/11 attack on the Twin Towers continue to search for and yearn for the body or any personal object of the missing person. And when nothing's available, they don't have closure. The aftermath of events such as the Hurricane Katrina or the earthquake in Haiti created an abundance of these type of losses. And a lot of times bodies are found and they were already decomposed so badly that identifying them was difficult. This is the kind of stuff we're talking about right here. In the second type of the ambiguous loss, this is the physically present, but they're psychologically absent. The condition is illustrated in the extreme where people who've lost their memory, dementia, Alzheimer's disease, or people with addictions and other chronic illness, mental illnesses. These type of people and expressions of their loss include abortion, childhood, abandonment, and either physical or emotional. The loss of childhood from physical or sexual abuse. This can occur as a result of having a family member in jail or experiencing a chronic illness. So these people are physically there, but psychologically they're absent. So, in other words, I've got a father figure in the home, but he's drunk all the time. He's not able to offer me, he's not a real father. He's not able to really, be a leader in the home. He's not able to provide the security that I need and the other types of things like that type of thing. We have what's called disenfranchised grief, and this is a new category of grief that's been defined. It's a grief that people experience when they incur a loss that is not or cannot be openly acknowledged, publicly and mourned, or socially supported. And there are three types of this disenfranchised grief. The first type is when the relationship is not recognized. Examples of this include non-kin relationships such as lovers, friends, neighbors, foster parents, colleagues, in-laws, step-parents, stepchildren, caregivers, counselors, co-workers, and roommates. It includes relationships that are not socially sanctioned, including extramarital affairs, cohabitation, and homosexual relationships. There's a certain belief that we should only mourn the loss of a family member, but often the non-kin relationships are stronger. So, these kind of relationships can often be pure, innocent relationships that we feel and we grieve over. And then, of course, some of them are relationships that probably shouldn't have been relationships to begin with. Nevertheless, there is genuine grief there, and there is genuine trauma there that is experienced. But because of the nature of the relationship, it may be thought to be inappropriate to express it openly. The second type is when the loss is not recognized as a loss because society doesn't define it as significant. And Kenneth Doka cites examples which include abortion, pet loss, and psychological death resulting from a coma. So, you have that category. And then the third type is when the griever is not recognized. This is a person that may be socially defined as not able to grieve. Dr. Doka offers examples such as the very young, the elderly, and the mentally disturbed or the mentally retarded. Each loss that someone experiences is not an isolated event. It's either connected to other losses or creates what we label as secondary losses. It's important to attempt to identify these in advance in order to lessen their disruptive impact when they suddenly occur and ambush the person. So keep it in mind that with a primary loss comes some secondary losses. Now, here, let's think about what they could be. Friend, provider, handyman, cook, a lover, bill payer, gardener, laundry person, companion, confidant, sports partner, mentor, checkbook balancer, prayer partner, mechanic, source of inspiration or insight, a parent, encourager, teacher, motivator, counselor, business partner, protector, errand person, organizer, tax preparer, couple, friends, Sunday school class. In other words, and we could come up with many more, but these are examples of secondary losses that come along with that. Every person fills more roles than just that primary role. And they mean something to many people, but they mean more than just the primary role that they stand in to whoever their primary person is in their life than just, husband or whatever, father. So they hold different positions and carry many responsibilities. And so these become losses. When we look at the impact and the weight of a loss, there are unexpected and sudden losses. A sudden loss or sudden death usually leaves the survivor with a sense of unreality that could last a long time. Sudden loss or death fosters a stronger than normal sense of guilt expressed by feelings and sentiments of if only statements. If only I'd have been there, if only I would have thought, if only I would have called and warned them. In other words, there's this guilt, this tendency to say, I've got some blame here. I've got some fault here. We feel guilty. That's normal. It's normal to have those feelings. In sudden loss or death, the need to blame someone else for what happened is extremely strong. Also, it involves medical and legal authorities, and this may need assistance in dealing with medical or legal community. Sudden loss or death often elicits a sense of helplessness on the part of the survivor. That's why I said one of the first things that I did when I was worked in hospice was one of the first responsibilities I did was say, what can I do to help you right now? I'd make phone calls, call depending on what was needed. Call family, call the coroner. I would call funeral home. I would call. It just depended, what they needed. That's what I would do, and that takes a great burden off of people at a time like that because it doesn't matter how prepared they were. They still, at the moment that it happens, it's almost like your mind just goes 1,000 different ways, and you don't know what to do. So to have someone step up and simply say, hey, listen, what can I do for you? And then the next words that come out of your mouth are, I got it taken care of then. You don't worry about it. You just focus on, resting or being with your family or doing what you need to do. This will be taken care of. That's very comforting and reassuring. Sudden loss or death elicits oftentimes a sense of helplessness on the part of the survivor. It leaves the survivor with many regrets and a sense of unfinished business. In the event of sudden loss or death, there is a need to understand why it happened. Almost every time this happens, particularly when it's unexpected, unanticipated. Along with this is the need to ascribe not only the cause, but also blame. And sometimes God is the only available target, and it's not uncommon to hear someone say, I hate God. You'll hear people that love God say that, or they'll say, why did God let this happen? Doesn't mean they don't love God anymore. It just means at the moment they are devastated. It means at the moment what they need is to just be encouraged that God loves them, that God is in control of this situation. And you don't have to come up with some mystical, powerful, anointed answer to them right then. What you need to do is just encourage them that you're there for them, to love them, and as you're praying, and whatever they need, you're here for them. Because nothing you say is going to be good enough anyway. How do we deal with the fear of loss? What do you do with this? Because, what we've been talking about now for several hours is the fact that trauma is real, loss is real. We've all experienced it, and we're going to experience some more unless we go be with Jesus real quick. That's the only way to get around it. And if we do that, everybody else in the room is fixing to experience it. Okay? Did y'all understand what I just said? Okay. So a lot of losses can be anticipated and even planned for, and that helps ease their impact. But a lot of them, you can't anticipate them and you can't plan for them. And a lot of experiences are difficult to grieve over because they're usually not accepted as losses. Everyone lives with fear to some extent, some more than others. The fear of loss is deeply ingrained within every one of us. Every loss we experience from early infancy on becomes part of this pool of fear. In other words, it grows and it increases. And plus, our culture is very different than a lot of Eastern culture. In our culture, we are taught as North Americans, we're taught that anything that's not increase, anything that's not successful, anything that doesn't cause you to win, be on top, finish first, is in any way related to second place or failure, is horrible, bad, and you don't want any part of it. And you better fear it, and you better stay away from it. But in other cultures, it's not that way. In other cultures, everybody fails. It's okay to come in second. As a matter of fact, it's honorable to be second. If that's your role in life, then you be the best second place man that you can be. Because that's your honorable position, sir. You understand? And to fail in something means you tried. And it means that you gave it your best, and now you have an opportunity to either do it again or to approach some new opportunity in life. In the Chinese language, that is the word crisis. Can you see it from here? That's the word crisis. And the word crisis in the Chinese language, you can see there are two words there, two Chinese words. Our word crisis, the Chinese word crisis, is actually a combination of two words, and it actually translates danger, opportunity, dangerous opportunity. So they don't see crisis like we do. When we say crisis, we go. In other words, to us, a crisis is one thing: bad news. Don't want crisis. But in the Chinese language, when you say crisis, you're saying it's an opportunity. It's a dangerous opportunity, but it's an opportunity. See, they don't view it from a negative context or from a negative position. They view it from an opportunity to benefit. And we need to see things from a different perspective too. So here's some helpful questions to ask. During the experience of loss, there are hidden questions that fester underground, but that at some point need to be addressed. You may want to ask the following questions. Do you ever wonder if you will recover from this loss? You could just ask people that. Do you think you will survive? Do you wonder if it's all right to continue with your life without whatever or whomever has been lost to you? Do you wonder if you can be happy and fulfilled, knowing that what you have lost is really gone and that your life will now be different? You ask these questions, and these questions begin to open up a flow and an avenue to speak into their life and to minister to them. In helping them recover, our society and our culture has chosen to ignore and avoid two major issues of life, and that is loss and grief. We just, like I've said many times, we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to address it. We don't want to deal with it. So we avoid it, and we just leave people hanging out there. But when anybody enters into grief, they enter into a valley of shadows. There's nothing heroic or noble about grief. It's painful. It's work. It's a lingering process, but it's necessary for all kinds of losses. And it's been labeled as everything from intense mental anguish to acute sorrow to deep remorse. Genesis 6:6 says, He was grieved in his heart. Who is this talking about? God himself experienced grief. He knows what it's like. Okay? So, and we know that the Bible teaches us that the Holy Spirit is grieved. You can quench the Holy Spirit and cause him to grieve. So, God is very well acquainted with what we go through and what we experience. It's emotion-filled. There's a multitude of emotions that are involved in the grief process. You can find bitterness, emptiness, apathy, love, anger, guilt, sadness, fear, self-pity, and helplessness. Grief is defined as intense emotional suffering. It's a sense of acute sorrow or deep sadness. The word grief is actually derived from the Latin verb meaning to burden. Many feel as though they're carrying a heavy weight or a heavy load, a burden. And it's all they can do to walk or to carry that load. It's not an illness, but it feels like one. A person's body reflects the grief. There's a tightness in the chest, the throat, the heart palpitates, the dry mouth, the shortness of breath, or a hollowness in the pit of the stomach. They can't sleep well at night. Their eating patterns are disrupted. These are all symptoms of grief. It's an expression of grief. Mourning is derived from the Latin verb that means to be anxious. Mourning is a process of remembering and thinking about what was lost. And this can make a person feel anxious and uncomfortable. It's tormenting to be in a state of grief and mourning. There's times when those you help will hear someone say, if you're a Christian, you don't need to grieve. I can remember Kenneth Copeland preaching a message one time about Christians shouldn't be grieving. And he preached an entire message on it. And he used Scripture. And, I'm sure, and at the time I thought it was fine and good, and I'm sure that, it was fine and good. Y'all understand what I'm saying? I'm not questioning what he preached. But the point is that I know today that he didn't understand the normal process of grief. Because his concept in that message was that if you're a born-again Christian, he said Jesus carried your grief and your sorrows, which the Bible does say that. He says, then when somebody dies or something, you shouldn't have any grief. Well, that's not the balance of what the Bible teaches. Okay? In other words, I'm not contradicting what the man said. I'm just saying the message wasn't finished. We needed part 2. Okay? Because Jesus did carry our grief and our sorrow. Isaiah says that. But there's more to the story. There's also the other side of the coin. Okay? What happens is that when we don't finish the story, we leave people in a position to where they feel condemned because they can't help the emotions they're feeling. They're struggling with pain. They're struggling with symptoms that are going on in their life. And they feel like, well, then my faith is inferior. My faith is not adequate. And we don't want people to feel like that. Matthew chapter 26, 37 through 38 says, And taking with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, he began to show grief and distress of mind and was deeply depressed. Then he said to them, My soul is very sad and deeply grieved, so that I am almost dying of sorrow. Stay here and keep awake and keep watch with me. So Jesus was grieved right here. Okay? Jesus felt grief. He expressed grief. Jesus was He was looking toward the cross. He realized what he was fixing to go through. You know what I'm saying? He wasn't experiencing great moments of joy and excitement thinking about the fact that his hands and side were going to be pierced. He wasn't thrilled about the fact that his beard was going to be plucked. He wasn't overwhelmed with the persecution that was to overcome him, with the weight of the sins of the world that were going to be cast upon him. Jesus was not overwhelmed with joy over this issue, but nevertheless, he didn't succumb to the temptation. However, he was grieved. Amen? Okay? So the purpose of grieving over loss is to go beyond one's reactions in order to face the loss and to work on adapting to it. Dr. Gerald May said, "Grief is neither a problem to be solved nor a problem to be overcome. It is a sacred expression of love, a sacred sorrow. The way out of grief is through it, and that means facing it." So that's good, amen? The stages of grief that people pass through are normal and can be immediate or postponed. But the underlying principle is that people should be encouraged to grieve. Some people delay their grief, which results in depression. Instead of feeling sad, they appear apathetic and numb. Denying or delaying is not a good thing. Eventually, grief surfaces, and they are going to have to mourn. In the meantime, they carry unrest, conflict, and ongoing depression into their future experiences. Last month, we taught on Psalms, if you remember. And we talked about David when he had committed sin with Bathsheba. And also, he had arranged for Uriah's life to be taken to try to cover his sin. And then we pointed out that it was approximately, historians say, probably as much as a year, maybe, something like that, of time that passed before David actually was confronted by the prophet. And he came clean and confessed his sin. And, you know, so you think about the torment and the restless nights that David experienced during that period there. He was miserable. He was grieving over his sin. He was tormented by conviction and resisting God and resisting his own heart to come clean before God and the nation. And he had sinned against God. He had sinned against his family. He had sinned against the nation. And just think about all he's experiencing and going through. And all he needed to do was confess his sin and repent. But yet, there's such a deception of the devil to not do that sometimes. And so then, of course, we see him in Psalms 51 when he repents. And when he's crying out to God, and he's confessing his sin, and he's saying, God, you know how good it is, and everything.